All right, so I am back now to look at what's going to be the end of book one, and then we're going to start book two today. So we're gonna, and this part is kind of a very really interesting part. I'm going to try my best to shorten up what I would normally say because I think I could easily make this 40 minutes, especially when we get to the beginning of book two, where we definitely get into the more internal elements of this plague. But we're going to start with section 7 here. And we're going to cover a little bit more about Dr. Ryu as he is meeting with several other doctors, and they're meeting with the prefect. And guys, I may be missing this. I think the prefect is Monsieur Othon. I think we're going to see him again later, but I may not be. He's the magistrate. Sorry, these terms are ones that I really should do more research into because I'm really not sure what a prefect or a magistrate does. A magistrate, I think, is more of a police officer, and a prefect is probably more of a government official. So I guess the prefect isn't named here. But anyway, they're going to meet, and what they're doing is they're trying to figure out what the next step should be. Who's going to do what about this particular, how they're going to handle calling this plague, or what are they going to do about the plague, that sort of thing. And there's a lot in this section that really can be applied to us today. We see a lot of similarity here. So let me look at a couple of these. It says, Ryu meets with the prefect, who again pushes responsibility back to Ryu. So he isn't willing to immediately take this as, okay, yeah, this is what we need to do. We're seeing again this whole, no one wants to be responsible because whoever admits that they're responsible and starts making changes is going to be hated by the people. You just can't win in this situation as a leader. We see that medication is in short supply. Remember, for us, coronavirus is new. For them, the Black Plague had been around forever, so they knew some ways to deal with it. But the serum that they would use is in short supply because they're not prepared. Now, can I just state the obvious? If they had started taking this serious earlier, they might have had more of the serum there, or at least gotten it moving quicker so that they wouldn't have had this problem. But because people wanted to drag their feet and not take it serious, bad stuff happens. No offense, this is the same issue we could have had with our stuff with coronavirus. People took it serious earlier. We could have started on a vaccine months before, and we could have cut this short by a few months, but we didn't. We drug our feet and blamed different parties for causing it, and just did the typical nonsense we do, where instead of dealing with the situation, we look for who to blame for the situation, which is not productive. The doctors in on the meeting, and I think there's three, including Dr. Ryu, they take varying views about how to handle this. One claims that you shouldn't jump to conclusions or be an alarmist because then you'll cause panic. And this is where I want to point out, he's not wrong, but Dr. Ryu kind of has the right response. Basically, he's going to say that it really doesn't matter. What's our goal? Our goal is that people shouldn't be dying. So let's do whatever it takes to cease that from happening or prevent that from happening. Once authorities admit it's plague, though, they know that certain actions are going to have to be taken that are going to be unpopular with the public. So think again, why so many, I know a bunch of people, depending on which side of this debate you fell, couldn't understand why certain governors wouldn't make these mask mandates, or didn't do earlier in the summertime, didn't require people to stay at home. And that's because as soon as they do, what happens? Well, a significant portion of the population becomes furious. And we saw it to an extreme when a bunch of people grabbed their assault rifles and decided to camp out on the Capitol steps, which how that was allowed, I'll never know. But yet that was the response. So you can see how people might be hesitant to say, hey, it's a plague, we're going to have to lock the town down, knowing that this could be the response. So that's why it's not that they're bad people. I mean, we constantly want to make people villains when we shouldn't. We need to understand that a lot of times people are doing it because of two reasons. One, they're trying to protect others, and two, they're trying to protect themselves. And while, yes, I guess you could say that kind of makes them a bad person, we would all be in that situation. Very few people want to make that tough call. There's just that, and by the way, we need those people in leadership. So, be on the lookout for that person. Ryu points out that the potential lethality of this plague for the town could be up to half of them could die within 2 months. And so what he's basically telling them is, call it what you want. Make it up some story about it being a fever. Who cares? But we need to figure out how to stop it. Those of us in power and those of us with the abilities need to do what we can to stop this. And then we need to, The people can be told whatever you want to tell them. Ryu is really focused on what needs to be done. It has to take top priority, which is why I love him as a character. I think that is the way to approach things like this. What is your final goal? What are you going to do to get there? Everything else, forget about it. Do whatever you want there, but we've got to find a way to save lives. Um, we point out that people seem hesitant to make the required changes, though, because it would require some pretty harsh changes in day-to-day life, and that's what they're trying to avoid. Think about, again, our situation. Once you shut down businesses, look at what it did. It's not a popular decision, and why should it be? It inconveniences people, and it does more than inconvenience some people. If you own a restaurant or a bar right now, you're hurting bad because of the limitations that a lot of restaurants are doing better because of how they've had to change things up. But a lot of places are really suffering right now. It feels like it's the wrong thing to do. But then again, if you left them open, look what happened when, all these places opened back up and people came and wouldn't wear masks and all crammed in together. And we had this big explosion of cases. So yeah, it's not the easy decision, but that's why you become a leader. By the way, you have to make the tough decisions sometimes. Again, Ryu seems unconcerned about inconveniencing people. He's the guy who's like, it doesn't matter. You lock down the places, you send everyone home from school, and you keep people alive, because alive is better than any other situation, than being out and getting to have fun and dying. Now, we can argue with his position too. Okay. I mean, and a lot of people have, the debate about schools reopening right now is really hot. It's a big argument point, locally and nationally. So, and there's a lot of ways to look at it. And the fact is, guys, that there's no easy answer to it. If there was, everyone would be doing it. But it does point to, which side of the camp do you fall on? Is it we have to save as many lives as possible, or is it we just have to go on with life and pray that nothing bad will happen? In fact, Ryu closes section 7 with a really cool line. He says, "How you phrase it doesn't matter to me. My point is that we should not act as if there were no likelihood that half of the population would be wiped out, for then it would be." And he's pointing out, I don't care what you call it. I don't care what steps you take. But if we don't understand that this is going to be the potential and we don't step in the way to stop it, then it's going to happen. There's just no way around it. And again, that's where we find ourselves today. All right. We have to acknowledge that if you don't do something about the spread of the coronavirus, it's going to get worse, and more people are going to die. And yes, the lethality rate of it might be quite low compared to the bubonic plague that they're facing in this book. But again, if it's someone you love that dies, it doesn't matter whether it's a million or just that one, it still hurts. And so we have to think about that. All right. Okay, so that gets us to the last section in book 1, which is section 8. Section 8 is a Qatar's section. It really is a lot about him, and I'm going to hit it fast and move on because it is not the most interesting stuff. Okay, we do find out that the media has started kind of covering things again, but they're not really covering it seriously. It's kind of like on the back pages of stuff, and people may glance into it, but it's definitely not headline material. We also find out the government is taking some steps, but they're doing what governments are known for doing, and that's dipping their toes in the water and seeing how are people going to react. So here's what they do. Again, if you have my text, we're on page 51. It says that small official notices had just been put up about the town, though in places where they would not attract much attention. It was hard to find in these notices any indication that the authorities were facing the situation squarely. The measures enjoined were far from draconian, and one had the feeling that many concessions had been made to a desire not to alarm the public. So what we learn is that they're really not doing much. They're doing a little so that they can say that they tried, but they're really not taking big steps yet, and that's a problem, okay? They start doing things like, and stop me if you've heard this one before, focusing on making sure you're cleanliness in your house, looking for fleas, that sort of thing. And also on, if you're sick, they have these isolation camps, you need to go to them. Does that not sound again like, if you back up to January, February, and the early part of March here, it was always about, if you just wash your hands, you'll be fine. And we heard that plenty. And obviously that wasn't totally true. And also the isolation thing, that's the whole stay-at-home order part. They're doing that too. So, I mean, this This playbook has been in existence for a long time, obviously. Okay, the next thing we got is Qatar. There's this huge section on him. We see Qatar's being a little bit shifty. We're supposed to be this. The tone being set up about this guy is that he is a suspicious cat for sure. Um, he seems to be trying to build a story around himself, a narrative. He's trying to control that. So maybe if he ends up in court, he can get out of his situation. He starts trying to make friends with people he thinks that would be considered good witnesses for him in court. And he even indicates that, which is terrifying. He changes his political views, at least outwardly. You know, they said before he had very liberal points of view. Now he's found reading the most conservative papers and trying to establish how conservative he is, but again, because he's hoping to change the way people see him. He starts sending money home, and he makes sure everyone knows he's sending money home and going through that. He makes comments about how he wishes he was a writer like, I think it's Gron. He wants to be a writer like him because writers can, or Teru, it's one of them, where he could be like them because they get away with more and people don't really hold them as accountable, which is an interesting statement. Uh, he also seems to even maybe consider getting put in a hospital, whether by contracting some sort of disease, whether it's plague or something else, on purpose or faking it, just because he doesn't think he'll be arrested when he's in a hospital. This guy is terrified of jail. All right, and we should be wondering, what did he do? And we never really find out, to be honest with you. It's not really something that they discuss. But again, this is one of those development passages about Qatar, but it's not all. This chapter is not about him because we have to have a major element of rising action here. And it definitely, this book is not a suspenseful book, but a little bit of suspense builds here at the end. We find out people are just hoping this is going to go away. That's their thought pattern. You're hoping enough, it'll happen. And again, we see that today where people are like, well, it's eventually going to go away, right? And we tell ourselves that again because it's a defense mechanism. We want to believe that eventually it just will stop. And we hope that that's the case. And guys, I'm right there with you. I really do. But I know that there's going to have to be some steps taken. But then at the top of page 62, we get the local population, who was so far had made a point of masking their anxiety by facetious comments, now seemed tongue-tied and went their ways with gloomy faces. Again, parallel that to today. People joking around, making fun of things, but then all of a sudden it becomes more serious as more and more of us are touched by it. And then that whole tone of a town changes and shifts, and that's what we see happening here. And things start to go off the rails at this point. More people are dying. It's spreading more. So, it's not just this one little contained area, and now it's everywhere, and you're having people die. Because remember, this particular thing is not like coronavirus in that you catch this one, you've got a really good shot of dying, and dying painfully and very visibly. All right. So things go off the rails, and then as this book one closes, you get a pretty interesting line. It says, the epidemic seemed to be on the wane. On some days, only 10 or so deaths were notified. Then all of a sudden, the figure shot up again vertically. On the day when the death toll reached 30, Dr. Ryu read an official telegram that the prefect had just handed him, remarking, so they got alarmed at last. The telegram ran, proclaim a state of plague, stop, close the town. So again, we saw this happen here. So much of this parallels our world today. It's like you think that you pray that it's just going to go away, and then all of a sudden one day the numbers go down, and you're like, okay, it's getting better. But then all of a sudden, bang, it shoots right back up because it's not a continuous rise like this. There's all sorts of different things. I remember right before school started, there was in the news, depending on which news source you were looking at, they were talking about how things were getting better because the cases in Florida dipped a lot. Well, if you looked at the situation, it was because there was a hurricane that had hit Florida and a lot of testing centers were closed. They just didn't have the numbers. When the president made a comment about our numbers look so bad, it's because we keep testing people. Technically he's not wrong. I mean, but that doesn't mean you quit testing people, by the way. I mean, they still have it, whether it shows up as a positive or not. That, if you don't test them, it doesn't disappear. But he was right about that. I mean, and that's what's going on in this town. Things all of a sudden get better. There could be all sorts of variables that make it look like that, but it goes from 10 to 30, which is a huge spike. And at that point, now we're in. They're going to admit it's the plague, and they're shutting everything down. All right. So that ends book one, which really does everything an introductory section should do. It establishes your main characters, it establishes your main conflict, and it gives you enough to kind of hopefully keep you interested and to finish the book. Because for most people, if you get through these initial parts that are kind of boring, you're probably going to hang around to the end. That doesn't apply to me. I have so many half-finished books out there. I'm just so disappointed in myself. But it's not because I don't like them. It's because I get sidetracked. There's so many good books out there, right? All right, now book two, section one. I'm going to read a lot of this because there are so many really well written passages, and it's so much of an internal thing. I find fascination in internal struggle. External struggle is boring to me. I mean, it exists. And if you're going to tell me a story about something that happened, yeah, I like there to be a little bit of external struggle. But I find people and the way we think much more fascinating than, a story about dinosaurs or a story about, natural disaster. Those to me don't have the weight of what we're going to see in this section. So, book two, section one is really about the immediacy after the town is shut down, because they're locking the town up. No one in, no one out. And we're going to see what it does to people, how their mental aspect progresses. And again, I'm going to hit the high points for you. You're going to be responsible for doing some of this on your own. Okay, so opening lines on page 67, he says, from now on, this is the very first line, it can be said that the plague was the concern of all of us. Now, skipping a little, I say, but once the town gates were shut, every one of us realized that all, the narrator included, were, so to speak, in the same boat, and each would have to adapt himself to a new condition of life. So at this point, and in the immediate, they learned that, okay, well, now we got to quit thinking about it as the other. We're all in this together now. We're all part of this town. We're all shut in here, and we all have to kind of join together and band together to fight this. By the way, when we finish this chapter or this section, they're not in that same place. And we saw this in pieces. You saw a lot of people showing up and flashing lights and stuff for the police and for the first responders, and everybody for a brief amount of time was being nice to grocery store clerks and treating them with respect because you knew how important they were. And of course that all faded. As a teacher, I'm going to be a little bit, salty myself about how, that seems to be not an issue for us as we're starting back school in a lot of places, and people are, not as interested in being concerned about us, but, we're just there to take a bullet. So, but for the record, I'm thrilled to be at school. So it's, I don't expect that, but I see a lot of districts where that's not the case. And so people do they initially go through this. Hey, we're there for you. We're proud of you. Thank you. But we really quickly forget about that. And we're going to see that paralleled in this chapter, actually. Okay. So the next thing we see is the town is now closed, and they start to feel it's this brief shining spot in this book where humanity returns and everyone is doing what they're supposed to, but communications with the outer world come to a complete halt, and eventually it starts to wear on you. So think back to that first week of March, or all of March really, when you initially went home from school, and almost every single student, whether they were seniors or freshmen or all the way down to the little kids, we're it stunk that this was going on, but hey, you got a break from school right when a lot of you needed it, and you were kind of excited. But eventually it came out that this was going to be it. A few weeks in, we learned we weren't coming back, and then all of a sudden things started to change. And the attitude before of, of there being a little bit of unity, it starts to fade away, especially in this town. So let's look at pages 70 and 71. Where we're going to start seeing the impact on emotions of people. All right, so let's see what they do. They're talking about separation here. It says, for every one of us, the ruling emotion of his life, which he had imagined he knew through and through, the people of Iran, as he had been said, had simple passions, took on a new aspect. Notice now we're seeing a change. Husbands who had complete faith in their wives found to their surprise that they were jealous, and lovers of the same experience. Men who had pictured themselves as Don Juans became models of fidelity. Sons who had lived beside their mothers, hardly giving them a glance, fell to picturing with poignant regret each wrinkle in their absent face that memory cast upon the screen. This drastic, clean-cut deprivation and our complete ignorance of what the future held in store had taken us unawares. We were unable to react against the mute appeal of presences, still so near and already so far, which haunted us day long. In fact, our suffering was twofold, our own to start with, and then the imagined suffering of the absent one, son, mother, wife, or mistress. So he's pointing out here that as people realize this separation they're dealing with, they start to become more and more aware of it and begin missing those things, which causes them another level of suffering. So think back to when we talked about Taru and how he said the best way to focus on your life is to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. Well, here we are. I laughed at the amount of people who came up to me back in the old pre-coronavirus days who were like, I can't wait to get out of school. I hate this place. I'm ready to move on. Who, once about May hit, would email me and talk about how sad they were and how much they missed this place. Some of you made comments right before school started about you didn't care that you had to wear masks as long as you could come back to school. Now, we all realize that get a few weeks in and some of those attitudes start to change. And that's sad, because if we could hold on to that and keep thinking about that, you'd be amazed at the kind of year you would have. But what happened between March and May was we started to realize how separate we were from people and how much we missed that. And it really gave you a new level of, I don't want to say depression because that's a clinical term, but of sadness, maybe. Okay. So really it starts the inconvenience becomes a lot more emotionally painful. And he points out the first thing the plague brought to our town was exile. So that's really what it comes down to now. Now people are exiled from the country and the world as a whole, but also in their own individual lives. They're exiled from the people they loved. If you cared so much about someone who lived the next town over, or someone was out on vacation or a business trip and they locked down the town, that's it. They don't get back in. Or picture yourself as somebody like Rambert, who's there on a trip to doing something for the paper he works for. And, now he's stuck. He can't leave. So this is all quite a painful situation for these people. And the rest of this chapter or this section really highlights the emotional damage that's happening to these people. We can go on to page 73, which I think really sounds like May, June, July of this year, when we were, definitely tired of the being at home. See at the top, it says they deprived themselves of those redeeming moments frequent enough when all is told, when by conjuring up pictures of a reunion to be, they could forget about the plague. It says they drifted through life rather than lived, the prey of aimless days and sterile memories like wandering shadows that could have acquired substance only by consenting to root themselves in the solid earth of their distress. They said at this point, people just kind of go through the motions. It's day to day. They're just in a constant state of depression. And I would say that's a lot better than sadness, the word to use here. And some of you got to that point, especially if your family took this a lot more seriously. And even though the city opened back up, you stayed home because you knew if you didn't need to go out, you shouldn't be going out. And but we say things like, well, how long can you possibly stay at home? As long as you need to. Is it comfortable? Is it fun? No, but life isn't about comfort and fun sometimes. And that's kind of what these people in this town are learning. That doesn't mean it doesn't cause you to be sad or depressed or miserable. And that's where we see this town as this first section is beginning to come to a close. We see another change in them that is highlighted on page 75. He says, talking about the plague here, it also incited us to create our own suffering and thus to accept frustration as a natural state. This was one of the tricks the pestilence had of diverting attention and confounding the issues. Thus, each of us had to be content to live only for the day, alone under the vast indifference of the sky. This sense of being abandoned, which might in time have given characters a finer temper, began, however, by sapping them to the point of futility. So he says initially people are feeling like they are all alone because, again, instead of realizing that we're all going through this same pain, we start compartmentalizing and I have it worse, or my situation is so much more difficult. Again, and I know I keep pointing to this example, and I want you guys to hear my heart and not think I'm trying to insult people on a political basis. But when you see all these people freaking out about how I'm tired of being shut up in my house, I want to go out to eat. I want to be able to go shopping. I want to get, a tattoo or a haircut or any of that sort of stuff. And these people seem to think that their boredom and stuff is the same level as someone who is, terrified of leaving their house because their grandparent has just died from this, and they're worried that they might have had something to do with it by bringing this virus back. These are not the same thing. But here's what they are. They're both examples of discomfort. One much worse than the other. But, if we can find those similarities and realize that and actually just kind of care about each other instead of caring about ourselves, But what we see in this book and what we see in real life is that the longer this goes on, the more and more we seem to focus inward on our own situation. And I guess a lot of that's because the only person you're with all day is yourself. And it's really easy to forget about the other people around you and what they're going through and to focus on your own stuff. And we see that come up again on page 76, where they say, in this extremity of solitude, and again, we're talking about these people kind of locking themselves in their own little worlds, both physically and mentally. None could count on help from his neighbor. Each had to bear the load of his troubles alone. And that's where the worst things can possibly happen. We have got to not lock ourselves into where we only worry about ourselves and our own burdens. We've got to bear the burdens of each other. Just because you've got a tough time doesn't mean that you don't still have what the person next door needs to help them. All right. There's a lot we can do to help each other and each shoulder each other's burdens. And it's what we should do. Now, it's what we should do just as humans. But if you claim to be a Christian, it is honestly, I hate to say it's your duty to get out there and help those around you. So I saw some kids doing nice things like if there were some older people in the neighborhood, at least when this pandemic business started, they would go by and say, hey, can I go to the store for you? And do things like that, which are minor things to the person going to the store. I'm going to the store anyway. Let me pick up some groceries for you. But to that person you're helping, it means all the world. And you know what else it does? It's a domino effect. Now that person is not going to just think about themselves. They're going to remember the kindness you showed them, and that spreads. But the negative spreads too. If we're going to just be all about ourselves and only caring about ourselves, it causes people to shut down. And we can't be shutting down at this point. We don't need to shut down in the best of times, but definitely not in the worst. And then the ending of this section, where we're going to stop, is one of the really powerful passages we read today. He says, their despair, and he's talking about the people, their despair saved them from panic. Thus, their misfortune had a good side. For instance, if it happened that one of them was carried off by the disease, it was almost always without his having had time to realize it. Snatched suddenly from his long, silent communion with the wraith of memory, he was plunged straight away into the densest silence of all. He'd had no time for anything. So they say that the despair in a way helps prevent people from panic, which I guess, again, our minds are built, God designed us amazingly to have ways to survive and to cope. But you got to think about one of the things that this plague had that our pandemic doesn't is, again, it was a rapid death for people who contracted this disease, and it was painful. But, one of the things that hurts the most for people who really get sick from this is the isolation. All right. When I went in during the summertime for my heart procedure, my wife couldn't come with me. And, I'm not going to lie and say I wasn't scared. My doctor definitely told me that there was a good chance that I might not survive. I mean, so much so that they made me go to a hospital that my insurance didn't cover because he didn't think I could make it all the way downtown if this couldn't kill me. So there was a lot of fear, but there's no one there for you to talk to. You just have yourself. That night when I was in my hotel room, goodness gracious, my hospital room, hotel rooms are cheaper, by the way. I was in my hospital room. I couldn't really connect with anyone. The nurses were, rightfully, they were a little nervous about coming in a room because you don't know if the person in there might be a carrier of this disease. Everybody's got masks. Everyone's keeping their distance from you, and you feel alone. And yeah, I had my phone, but I didn't bring a charger with me. When I went to the doctor, I assumed that I was going to be home that night. So once my phone died, I had no way to really connect with anyone. And that was just for one night, and it was difficult. You can only imagine what it would be like for people over an extended period of time. And so now for these people, the new defense mechanism for them, which it used to be putting this off as it's not a big deal, it's someone else's problem. Now their defense mechanism is just despair, just pure depression. And that's how they're going through their life. It doesn't sound like a really pleasant experience, right? Mr. Morris, why make us read such a depressing book? Because there's a lot of lessons to be pulled out of this that we can apply to today. And I hope you got a few out of the conversation we've had. Definitely think about how you can help those around you, because when we help others, it's amazing how that impacts how we feel. That's just an amazing thing, again, that we've been designed in a way that being caring and helping is a positive, and it makes us feel better. Being depressed and selfish will constantly bring you down. All right. So even if it's small things make a difference. The other is to just be kind to others and think about, even if this bugs me and is inconvenient for me, can it help someone else? Because inconvenience is a minor sacrifice if you can save someone's life, to be honest with you. All right, guys, we are going to end here. Again, I have to go back and catch some more notes. The goal this week is to be all the way through books 1, which we are now, book 2 and book 3. Actually, we should finish all of them. So this video is the one that should be intended for Wednesday, that we're completing now. I have 2 more to do, but I'm still in the middle of making notes out for them. So I'm going to start on that and come back and try to get at least through the next video for you. If I don't have Fridays posted when these go live on Monday, understand they will be up very soon, okay? All right. Thank you again for taking the time to be with me through this. And I hope that everything's going okay for you and your families. And I hope that everyone is out there staying safe. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.